And thank you so much, Ernie, for that cogent and fortunately upbeat talk, especially as this comes on the eve of Prime Minister Harper's trip to India to open up the nuclear trade. But in the absence of Pavel, I would like to begin with one question, and then I will turn the next one over to Trevor. When we're talking about the non-proliferation treaty, and Ernie has mentioned that there should be a whole process that takes in many different treaties and make it into a routinized procedure. But one problem with the nuclear non-proliferation treaty, I think, is that there is a cutoff date that only countries that have tested their weapons before 1967 can in fact join the NPT. So does this need to be overhauled, for instance, before 2010 when this treaty comes up for review?
Well, the other countries are precluded from joining as nuclear weapon states. They're not precluded from joining as non-nuclear weapon states, which the Security Council resolution again encouraged them to do, but which they're not going to do, not before the NPT review conference or for a long time after that. So I think that the focus needs to be on bringing these three countries in particular. I think DPRK and Orion are a different category, but bringing these three countries particularly into some level of obligation related to their nuclear weapons, and to drawing them then into a more multilateral process. I think, and there are more eminent authorities here that could speak to this, but I think that the opening up reform of the NPT is a non-starter. Tom Graham has advocated at some points adding a protocol to the NPT, which would give some kind of recognition to India, Israel, and Pakistan, and require of them, put them under the obligation of Article 6 and so forth. But that wouldn't be a NPT amendment process, but an addition to it. I think the chances of doing something this, in advance of the 2010 are very, very, very remote.
And all right, and now do we have another question from Trevor?
Actually, Olivia, I can speak to Ernie any old time, so I'd like to surrender my time to the audience. I think that's more important.
Very generous. Well, this gives everyone there, who I'm sure has a lot of questions, more time. Yes.
Pierre Jasmin, President of Artists for Peace and Pugwash member from Montreal, actually. Thank you, Ernie, for bringing this concern that should have been, I think, in the program, or we should have devoted the whole session on the obstacle of NATO and NORAD to the process. I think Bev DeLong of the Canadian Network for Nuclear Weapons Abolition produced a very revealing piece 2 years ago about these, the complete contradiction of these policies of NATO with the non-proliferation, for example, treaty obligations. Thank you also. I think Harper government is another factor which is strongly an obstacle. I don't know if everybody in this room is aware that we were the only government voting last November against the proposal in the United Nations First Committee of its 63rd session, asking nuclear countries to disalert their bombs from high alert status. It was a proposal put forward by Sweden, New Zealand, Nigeria, and so on. Canada was the only country voting against, which I found completely revolting, and it started an exchange of letters with the Minister of External Affairs, Lawrence Cannon. And you deftly also informed us about Harper being in India, and well, actually, Olivia did. And this is also scandalous, I think.
Now, do you have a question?
The question
I'm trying
is,
to be tough with people.
what do you think about, I would really be interested in this, what do you think of this curious Canadian program that was announced by Lawrence Cannon well, it wasn't announced, but it was further, he committed himself further last June in Italy about this program of $1 billion of our Canadian money given to former nuclear physicists of Russia, of Ukraine. I would have liked to ask actually Pavel this question, but maybe you could inform us about this program. Is it really effective in destroying all submarines, or is it just helping the Russians establishing new weapons, which are more technologically advanced?
I think you're referring to the partnership program, in which was launched at the Kananaskis G8 summit, in which Canada committed an extraordinary amount for Canada, $1 billion over 10 years, $100 million a year to help in support of I think it's an important and essential initiative. I can't speak with confidence, and maybe Trevor can and others, about the actual implementation and the effectiveness of it on the ground. The principle of it is very important, and it's very good to see Canada to make that kind of a commitment. It'll be very interesting to see what kind of a follow-up commitment Canada looks for on this nuclear file in the forthcoming. Because I think it would be an extraordinary thing if having that nuclear program to be so central to the Kananaskis summit for the issue to be absent from the agenda on the Huntsville summit. So that'll be interesting. Just one other thing. I just wanted to I was very disturbed about Canada's vote on the de-alerting resolution, but Canada was not the only country that voted against it. The United States and most NATO countries voted against it as well.
Did they abstain?
Canada was not the only country that voted no. There may have been many of the NATO countries may have been abstention, and maybe, and I'm a little confused now as to whether Canada's was a no vote or an abstention vote, but.
Was no vote.
Was no vote.
Okay, I think we should move on now to the next question. And this gentleman in the back.
All right, my name's Sonny Young. I'm with the Hiroshima Day Coalition, and we can control what goes on in our sphere of influence, Canada being the country that provided uranium from Saskatchewan that was used on the nuclear weapons in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And we know that there's a big business in war, and we find that maybe Saskatchewan is going to be selling more uranium for nuclear reactors. We know that we've made mistakes in our relations with India, and that CANDU reactors were modified. And even now, there's the potential for conflict between Pakistan and India as being the next nuclear war, given that the Americans have allocated resources in that area to favor India expanding its nuclear adventures and maybe possible intervention along the Pakistan-Afghan border. What is your view of our hands and our relationship with the United States?
Oh boy, that's a big one. I think that the way in which we need to deal with this is meticulous Canadian participation and support for the multilateral constraints and building up an international multilateral system to constrain. That's why the Canada's action on India was hugely disappointing because it was a major change in the multilateral rules on the treatment of nuclear cooperation with countries like India, countries that are not under full scope safeguards, and Canada there, unfortunately, in this, and didn't begin only with the Harper government, but Canada really sat on its hands in that whole process. Didn't even support the New Zealand Norway, Netherlands, some of the other countries that were working at least to get some kind of non-proliferation conditionalities out of India related to the change in the nuclear supplier group process. But Canada really sat on its hands there, and that's not a good omen. So now the kind of the fallback position is, can we, in the bilateral nuclear cooperation agreement that is most certainly coming between Canada and India, can there be introduced into that some non-proliferation conditionalities? And the reports and informal conversations indicate that foreign affairs, people are trying, but I wouldn't rate the chances of success on that really very high.
And see you next.
Edwards of the Canadian Coalition for Nuclear Responsibility. Ernie, I'd really like to ask your opinion about the potential and the importance of getting a real public movement going towards raising the profile on this question to the Canadian government and to the world. Because it seems to me that this unprecedented opportunity that we are faced with at the moment is going to slip out of our fingers if it remains so cloistered as it is at the present time. With regard to the NATO, for example, Canada could play a very important role in simply openly questioning and raising the questions about NATO's nuclear policy. That alone, I think, would be a major contribution. But I doubt that it's going to happen if we don't get a real movement going on that. I'd just like to hear your views on how urgent that is and how we might get the ball rolling.
Well, it's urgent, and it's needed, and I think I'll if you don't mind, there's a panel on that topic at the end of the day, and we're going to have some people talking about it. I mean, recognizing it's hard to get public heavily interested in what are somewhat arcane questions, although the fundamental principles behind them are not arcane at all. They're fundamental to our own survival and social and psychological well-being, never mind our physical safety. So the importance, that's undeniable. And I'm this is punting, but I'm hoping that in the panel this afternoon we're going to get some help on that.
Great. Next question. Yes.
Shirley Farlinger. Hi, Ernie. Thanks for your talk. I think we have to look at why people are wanting to acquire nuclear weapons. I understand, and we just spent a day on North Korea, I understand they honestly believe that South Korea has nuclear weapons, and of course the U.S. and other countries have naval operations off the coast of North Korea regularly, and they know those are nuclear armed. The war in Iraq is not lost on the people of Iran. I think we have to address some of the reasons behind this thinking. It would be nice to think that they think that nuclear weapons are not militarily useful. However, the United States has always thought they were militarily useful. Is it possible in negotiating for the United States to take the first drastic step at reducing the levels as the way to negotiate?
Well, I think that's what we've been saying for a long time. The failure for effective movement on implementation of Article 6 is what is making implementation of Article 3 so difficult. And so, but having said that, the DPRK and Iran, they've signed the treaty. They signed the treaty when both Russia and the United States had a heck of a lot more nuclear weapons, more actively deployed in their regions than now. And that was that, when they signed the treaty, and it's fundamentally important that they they be brought into compliance with it. But I agree that the kind of diplomacy that has been practiced in the last while is not what's going to do it. There has to be, in the case of Iran in particular, there has to be an clear understanding of or a clearer appreciation for Iran's own security interests, its relationship with the rest of the world, its stature within that region, and so forth. So those are important elements. The issue on which there isn't compromise is on whether it or not it comes into compliance. That's a fundamental and not negotiable requirement.
Okay. Are there other questions? Yes.
My name's Erica Simpson. I just wanted to clarify something that you said, Ernie. We all know that in the U.S., the critics of the NPT regime are using the cases of Iran to argue and to undermine the NPT. So you were saying at the beginning of your talk that we do need to turn to the non-proliferation side of the equation, and you said we need to have success vis-a-vis Iran, and then you added North Korea, and my heart sort of sunk because I thought, well, we're not going to get success on Iran and North Korea, certainly not before the 2010 review conference. So what's your timeline on that? When we argue with the opponents of the NPT, what's our timeline for saying we need to have success on North Korea and Iran?
Well, I think the argument is a basic principle that if you're disarmament and progress in disarmament requires a non-proliferation system in which the international community has confidence, in which it is viewed to be working. That's fundamental requirement. And the longer it is viewed to be difficult and not working, even though I would argue that it's worked extremely well in relative terms, but the ongoing problem undermines confidence. Timelines. I think these things are all urgent. We're all looking for what's kind of the key to ensuring that the NPT, that the 2010 conference doesn't go the way of the 2005 conference, which would be extraordinarily devastating. I don't think that. I don't think you can pinpoint and say that unless Iran issue is settled, the 2010 conference will go down the tubes. I wouldn't think that. But in the long run, it needs to be dealt with constructively, so as to build confidence that we can pursue a world without nuclear weapons, and be sufficiently assured that we know it's continuing to be a world without nuclear weapons, and for that we need a very effective regime.
And we have time for about 2 more questions. So, yes.
My name is Mark Leith, and I'm a psychiatrist, and I'm with the Canadian Physicians for Global Survival and the Department of Peace Initiative. From an evolutionary point of view, the midbrain, particularly the male midbrain, was raised for hunting. And there's this false idea that somehow our discussion is based on logic, and it's not. It's based on rationalization. And I guess really, in large part, what we're dealing with is confronting denial. And the midbrain, again, is thrilled by violence. And Oppenheimer, when he created the bomb, was thrilled, almost in an orgasmic way, because sex and violence are really the same, different sides of the same coin. So I guess it's important not to be trapped in endless, apparently logical loops that really go nowhere.
Point well taken. I mean, the converse isn't true, that we kind of embrace illogic, obviously. So we need, there are interests involved and so forth, but.
Okay, we do have time for 1 more question. Yes.
Gordon Edwards again. I'm very concerned about the fact that we're talking about an effective non-proliferation regime when we already have had, outside the scope of the non-proliferation treaty, we already have Israel, India, Pakistan, and of course the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, who are all proliferators. I mean, they're the ones who started the ball rolling and who have the nuclear weapons. And they're all treated as, well, in the case of Israel, Pakistan, and India, they're all treated as friends and allies. And right now, as you said, Canada and other countries are extending to India the kind of benefits in terms of nuclear cooperation that the other countries have to earn by foregoing nuclear weapons. So I think that we really have an alarming situation in terms of Canada's actions right now, because they are contributing to communicating the message that proliferation pays. And I'd just like to know what you think about what Canada can do about that at this point, at this juncture.
Yeah, just one thing about the kind of harping on the non-proliferation regime. I mean, I feared this, that it would take over the focus and would be viewed as being the more important thing. My point in talking about the non-proliferation regime is that I'm talking to a whole room full of people, I think, in which there's very, very strong support for disarmament and the Article 5 or Article 6 obligation, and that in which we recognize very profoundly that the failure of compliance with Article 6 is undermining our non-proliferation. So that's the fundamental position that we have. But I think I just wanted to remind ourselves that that doesn't diminish the importance of an effective non-proliferation regime. So it's important to restore a little bit of balance between those two discussions. I mean, what we can do now about the de facto situation of India, Pakistan, and Israel that's a very tough question. I mean, I'm quite heartened by what Pavel said, because it was also said in a discussion I was involved in with some Indians and Pakistanis, and that is their basic recognition that when both of them required nuclear weapons, the notion that this had a salutary effect on their own security is absurd. It doesn't. It complicates their lives enormously. That doesn't mean they're about to get rational and get rid of those weapons. Unfortunately, so we've got a big problem, and I think that we've allowed it incrementally to get worse. And the Nuclear Supplier Group action was one of those increments that was very important. I think the nuclear cooperation agreement between Canada and India that's coming is going to be another increment that in the wrong way, unless there are some non-proliferation conditionalities attached to it. But I don't have confidence in that.
All right. Well, Ernie, thank you so much for your talk, and also for illuminating everyone with your questions and answers.